That Christmas Eve, I stood on the porch in the blizzard, my bare hands clutching my portfolio like a final life raft. Inside, wine and laughter cracked as my sister received her life-changing gift. When the door slammed shut, an old figure in a wool cap moved through the snow, holding an old steel box that looked like it was from the railroad era. He looked at me, then said one sentence that silenced the mountains. "Are you ready to rebuild everything?" My name is Rebecca Rollins. I am 32 years old, and I am standing in a blizzard, locked out of my sister's engagement party. The resort in Aspen is a fortress of golden light against the swallowing white of the storm. Every dark wooden beam on the chalet is draped in tasteful, warm white LEDs. Snow, heavy as wet fleece, piles on the steep roofs. Through the triple-glazed windows, I can see the string quartet in the great room, their bows moving in perfect, frantic unison to Carol of the Bells. The sound is just a faint, furious buzzing through the glass. I am, technically, the maid of honor. My role is signified by the now damp silk dress, a color described as winter pine, which in this light just looks like surgical green. My bridesmaid duties are, apparently, complete. I am still clutching my portfolio, a large, worn black leather case with a zipper that always sticks. It's heavy, filled with the blueprints and material samples for a dental office redesign that might, if the client pays on time, cover payroll for my 2 employees. It feels less like a portfolio and more like an anchor, or maybe a shield. Inside, the party is peaking. My father, Gregory Rollins, raises a champagne flute. His voice, which I can no longer hear, is certainly booming with the manufactured warmth he reserves for clients and my sister. He is toasting Sable. Sable Rollins, my younger sister, the star of the family. She is luminous, her laughter bright enough to be seen from out here. She is accepting her surprise. It is not just a toast. My mother, beside her, is weeping joyful, perfect tears. The surprise is a set of keys. Not a car, the keys, presented on a velvet cushion, are to a brand new ski-in ski-out chalet in Vail, a $1.2 million chalet. I remember clapping. I clapped until my palms were numb, which did not take long. As my hands were already frozen, I clapped and smiled, a rictus fixed on my face, performing my role for the back of everyone's heads. I watched the professional videographer's lens pan across the room, a steady cinematic sweep. It grazed past my parents, lingered on Sable's ecstatic, tear-streaked face, caught the admiring guests. The lens slid right over me, a ghost in a green dress. I was part of the background, the blurry, unimportant scenery. Earlier, just before the toast, I had made my mistake. The music was softer then, the air thick with the scent of roasted pine nuts and expensive perfume. I found my father near the fireplace, checking the time on his Swiss watch. "Dad?" I kept my voice low, just a murmur beneath the strings. He turned, annoyed at the interruption, but softened when he saw it was me. "Rebecca, good. You're not drinking too much, are you? Your mother needs this to be perfect." "It is perfect," I said, the lie tasting like ash. "Dad, I need to ask you something, a favor. It's temporary. A loan." His smile tightened. "A loan? Rebecca, this is hardly the time." "I know. I'm sorry. It's just payroll. The check from the Henderson build is late, and I have 2 employees. I just need to cover their December salaries. I can't let them go before Christmas." I took a breath, the humiliation hot in my throat. "It's $7,500. I'll pay you back by the end of January, with interest." He didn't laugh right away. First, he looked around, as if to ensure no one important was witnessing this moment of my failure. Then, the laugh came. It was not a boom. It was a short, sharp crackle, like a sheet of ice breaking under a boot. "7,500?" he repeated, not whispering at all. "Rebecca, what have I told you about this little hobby of yours? A business needs to be profitable. If you can't make payroll, that's the market telling you something. Listen to it. It's not a hobby, I said, my voice shaking, my portfolio feeling suddenly twice as heavy. It's a company. I have clients. It's just a cash flow issue. It's always a cash flow issue, he said, patting my arm in a gesture of finality. Go get some champagne. Enjoy yourself. Look at your sister. She knows how to build a successful life. That was when Sable appeared, drifting over like a snow wraith in her white designer dress. She had heard. Of course she had heard. Becky, always so serious, she whispered, her voice a sweet poison. She leaned in, her breath smelling of mint and champagne. Maybe you should try a real job for once, just for a little while, get your feet under you. A real job, unlike my independent architecture studio, unlike the blueprints in my hand, the product of 3 all-nighters, unlike the profession I had earned a master's degree in. Her words were meant to cut, and they did. They severed the last thread holding me to the room. I turned away, my face burning. I did not have a reply. I just walked, blindly toward the exit, needing air, needing to escape the suffocating heat and the sound of my own failure. The party's soundtrack shifted then. The string quartet, having finished their set, was being replaced by a DJ. The speakers erupted with the heavy synthetic bass of electronic dance music, a jarring pulse that vibrated through the floor. I was at the main threshold, a massive arch of dark, polished timber. The staff had been spreading rock salt on the stone veranda outside, and the melted snow and salt had formed a slick, treacherous slush that had been tracked inside. I did not see it. My foot, in its absurdly impractical silk heel, hit the wet patch. I pitched forward, my balance gone, the glass of red wine in my hand, a glass I did not even remember picking up, flew from my grasp. It arced through the air in a perfect, terrible parabola. Landing on the pristine, light wood flooring of the entryway, it shattered, splashing a stain like a fresh arterial wound across the planks. Everything stopped. The music seemed to dip. A woman gasped. All eyes, finally, were on me. I scrambled to my feet, my dress soaked with slush. I'm so sorry. I slipped. A security guard, dressed in a discreet black suit, was at my side instantly. He was polite, his voice professionally calm. Ma'am, let's get you cleaned up. Why don't you step outside for a moment? Yes, I need a towel, I stammered, looking at the mess. Right away, ma'am. He gently, firmly, guided me by the elbow. I stepped over the threshold onto the stone veranda, into the full, howling force of the blizzard. The wind snatched the air from my lungs. Snow, sharp as sand, blasted my face and bare arms. I turned back, expecting him to hand me a cloth. Instead, he gave me a tight, impersonal smile. We'll take care of this. Please, stay out here for just a moment while we clean up. We need to keep the heat in. And with that, he closed the heavy oak door. I stared at the wood grain for a second, uncomprehending. I heard the lock, not a deadbolt, but the heavy metallic clack of the magnetic lock engaging. A cold, final click. I was outside, in the snow, at my sister's party. My breath plumed in front of me, a thick, desperate cloud. The cold was shocking, a physical blow. It seeped through the thin silk of my dress, through the soles of my shoes. I started to shiver violently, my teeth chattering so hard my jaw ached. My portfolio was the only thing I had, and I pressed it against my chest as a useless defense against the wind. I pulled out my phone. The screen was a painful blue glare in the dark. My fingers, already stiffening, fumbled with the passcode. I opened my banking app. The balance blinked at me. $2,184. Not enough for payroll. Not enough for my studio rent. Due in 1 week. Not enough for anything. A new email notification lit up the top of the screen. The subject line was simple. Stark. Final notice. Commercial lease payment overdue. My vision swam. The cold. The humiliation. The sheer, crushing weight of my failure pressed down on me. I sank onto the top step of the veranda, the icy stone burning through my dress. I was done. I was going to lose my company. I was going to fail my employees. My father was right. Sable was right. It was all just a hobby, and I had failed. I huddled against a stone pillar, letting the snow cover me, too tired to even brush it off. "That's a cold place to sit?" The voice was rough, like gravel and rust. It cut through the wind. I flinched, looking up. I hadn't heard anyone approach. He was sitting on the steps just a few feet away, partially hidden by the shadow of the grand staircase. He looked as if he were carved from the mountain itself. He was thin, wiry, and old, wearing a faded plaid jacket that looked wholly inadequate for the weather. A gray wool cap was pulled low over his forehead. He was not shivering. In his lap, he held a steel box. It was an old military-style box, or perhaps a miner's box, with chipped green paint and a heavy clasp. His gaze was fixed on me. His eyes were the strangest color, a clear, sharp amber, like whiskey held up to a light. They were observing me, not with pity, but with a keen, unsettling assessment. "Heard the lock?" he said, his voice quiet, yet it carried. "Nasty sound." I could only nod, my jaw too stiff to form words. He looked at the grand chalet, then back at me. "They drinking the good stuff in there?" "Champagne," I managed to say. "Right." He nodded slowly. He looked down at the snow-covered portfolio I was clutching to my chest. "You a painter?" "Architect," I whispered. "Interior architect." "An architect. A builder." He seemed to mull that over. "And you're out here, while they're in there, figures." He looked at me, a direct, piercing gaze. "What's your name? Girl?" "Rebecca." It came out as a croak. He grunted, a small, thoughtful sound. "Rebecca, I once stood right here in the snow, too, on this very spot. Different party, same cold." I stared at him. He seemed utterly out of place, a relic from a different, harder time, sitting on the steps of this palace of glass and timber. His gloveless, gnarled fingers traced the rusted clasp of the steel box in his lap. "You look like you're at the end of something." "I am," I said. The admission was hollow. "Good," he said, which made no sense. "The end is where you see what's real, what's left." He shifted, setting the box down on the snow-dusted stone between us. The sound was a solid, heavy thud. "What's in the box?" I asked, my curiosity a tiny, flickering ember against the cold. "Jewelry?" His face cracked into a dry semblance of a smile. "Not hardly." With a deliberate movement, he undid the clasp. It groaned in protest. He lifted the heavy lid just an inch, shielding the contents from the falling snow. He angled it toward me. It was not jewelry. It was not gold. Inside, nestled on old, faded velvet, was a jumble of objects that seemed to have no connection. I saw the edge of a map, yellowed and brittle, covered in precise, hand-drawn property lines, a large, heavy ring of keys, so rusted they looked fused together, and sitting on top, a piece of the modern world wrapped in the old, a small, black USB flash drive, bound tightly in black electrical tape. "The people in there," he said, gesturing with his chin toward the door. "They like things that shine, keys to chalets, cars, stocks." He tapped the steel box. This is for builders. This is for people who understand that what matters isn't the shine, it's the foundation." He closed the lid, the sound a dull, final thunk. He looked at me again, those amber eyes seeming to weigh my very soul. "Question is, Rebecca," he said, his voice dropping, "are you a builder, or are you just another guest they're about to forget?" His question hung in the air, freezing right alongside my breath. It was the word, builder, that did it. It was the name that defined my function. I was not a daughter. I was the practical one. I was not a sister. I was the strong one. I was the load-bearing wall. designed to be unseen, taken for granted, and expected to hold everything up without cracking. And I was cracking. My whole life had been a construction site, just not one I had designed. We grew up in the Denver suburbs, in a sprawling faux Tudor that my father loved because it looked expensive from the road. But a house has a hierarchy, a floor plan of affection. Sable, the star, the presentation piece, was given the corner bedroom on the second floor. It had floor-to-ceiling glass, a built-in window seat, and an uninterrupted cinematic view of the front range. I was given the practical room. It was the finished attic, accessible by a narrow, steep set of back stairs behind the kitchen. The ceiling slanted aggressively, so low on the north side that I, even as a child, could not stand up straight. It was a constant architectural reminder to duck, to make myself smaller. My father said it would build character. I learned to sleep with the dull, constant vibration of the main HVAC unit vibrating through my pillow. It was the room for the things that were necessary but not beautiful. It was my room. This division was codified every birthday, every Christmas. My gifts were utilities. For my 10th birthday, I received a high-intensity articulated desk lamp. For my 12th, a professional set of drafting rulers and T-squares. My Sweet 16, a subscription to Dwell magazine. Sable's gifts were declarations. Her 10th birthday, a delicate gold necklace with a single diamond chip. Her Sweet 16, the keys to a brand-new, cherry-red convertible and an all-expenses-paid ski trip to Telluride for her and 5 friends. I watched her open the boxes, the glitter, the sheer, unapologetic want of it all. I felt no jealousy, not really. It was too late for that. I only felt a dull, cold acceptance. This was the structure. This was the blueprint of our family. I asked my mother once, when I was perhaps 14. We were in the kitchen, and I was doing my homework at the island while she signed checks for Sable's writing lessons. "Why is it always different?" I asked. "Why does Sable get things, and I get tools?" My mother paused, her pen hovering. She looked at me, her expression a mixture of mild surprise and impatience, as if I had just asked her to explain why the sky was blue. She reached over and fixed my collar, a gesture that was meant to feel like affection but felt like an adjustment. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice laced with that specific, pitying softness. "You're the strong one. You're tough. You don't need all that." That was the sentence. It was not a compliment. It was a cage. "You're strong, so you don't need." It was the concrete they poured into my mouth every time I tried to ask for warmth. It was the justification for their negligence. I was strong, so I could be left alone. I was strong, so I could sleep in the attic. I was strong, so I did not require celebration. In high school, I poured that strength into the only thing that made sense to me: the work. I lived in the woodshop and the drafting studio. My junior year, I entered the statewide Future Living competition. I designed and built a complex, 1:24 scale model of a passive eco-house. It used geothermal cooling pipes buried in a thermal mass and a clerestory window array, a series of high-angled windows designed to capture and maximize low-angle winter light. I won first place. The prize was $500 and a heavy plaque. I brought it home, my hands shaking with a nervous, unfamiliar pride. My father was in the kitchen, reading the stock tickers on his laptop. I set the plaque on the granite island, the metal making a soft clink. He glanced up from the screen. His eyes flickered to the plaque, then to me. "Good," he said, his voice flat. "That's nice?" He looked back at his computer. "Now clear the table. Your mother is serving dinner." The plaque and the $500 check went into a drawer in the attic. The model, which I had spent 80 hours building, was stored in a closet, where it eventually warped from the summer heat. I did not ask them for college money. I knew better. I worked until my fingers had calluses and my eyes burned. I graduated high school with a 4.2 GPA. I earned a full-ride scholarship for environmental design at the university. A full ride. I told them the news at dinner. My mother clapped twice, a dry, papery sound. "Well, isn't that practical?" she said. "We're so proud. Now, Sable, about the dresses for your debutante ball. We simply must decide." My entire 4 years of university, the 4 years I was drowning in studio critiques, complex load calculations, and the history of modernism, they were consumed by one thing: Sable's debut, the fittings in Denver, the parties in Aspen, the selection of the right escort. The day I graduated, I stood in a stadium filled with thousands of black caps and gowns. It was a beautiful, bright May afternoon. I scanned the massive crowd in the stands, squinting against the sun, looking for them, just in case. I saw families hugging, fathers lifting their daughters onto their shoulders, mothers weeping with joy. My phone was silent. I stood there, holding my diploma, a scroll of paper tied with a red ribbon, completely, utterly alone. I was a structural element that had successfully held up my own weight. No one sends a congratulatory card to a supporting column. I learned later they had been at a polo match. Sable thought she might meet a banker. I moved back to Denver, still foolishly determined to prove my worth in their world. I would build something so big and so beautiful, they would finally have to see me. I got a job at the most prestigious architecture firm in the city, Lowell Studio. The owner, Victor Lowell, was a charismatic tyrant, a man who wore beautiful Italian suits and had a gift for sniffing out talent he could exploit. He saw me coming a mile away. He loved me in private. "Rebecca," he would say, leaning over my desk late at night, his voice a confidential, conspiratorial purr. "This is brilliant, revolutionary. You have the touch. You see the light." I was young, starving for validation, and I drank it like water. I worked 18-hour days. I was the engine in his basement, the one turning the gears, and he was the polished, public-facing facade. Then came the Northlight Project. It was a community center in a dark, north-facing mountain valley. The client was small, the budget tiny. It was a charity project Victor took for the PR, and he gave the grunt work to me. "See what you can do with this, Rollins," he'd said, tossing the folder on my desk. I saw it as the ultimate challenge. How do you bring in light where there is none? I spent months on it. I resurrected my old high school design. Refining it with professional software and an engineer's precision, I designed a facade system, a series of angled external louvers and internal light-reflecting shelves. It was a passive system designed to capture the low-angle winter sun and bounce it deep into the building, warming the concrete floors and illuminating the space without a single watt of electricity. It was my soul translated into physics. I called it the Northlight Facade. I presented it to Victor in his corner office. He stared at my digital model for a long time, his face completely unreadable. "Good work, Rollins," he said finally, his voice flat. "Take the weekend off. You look terrible." I came back on Monday morning, exhausted but proud. He called an all-hands meeting in the main conference room. He stood at the front, my blueprints, my calculations, my 3D renderings projected on the massive screen behind him. "I had a breakthrough this weekend," he announced, beaming at the assembled staff. "A new concept for the mountain project, a proprietary system that is going to change cold climate design. I call it the Lowell Winter Light System." He proceeded to present my entire design, my calculations, my sketches, as his own. I sat there, my blood turning to ice water, my heart hammered against my ribs. A trapped bird. He had not changed a single line. He just changed the logo on the title block from my initials to his. I confronted him afterward, my voice shaking so hard I could barely speak. He laughed. He actually laughed. "Rebecca, you're a junior designer. You contributed to the design. That's how a firm works. We are Lowell Studio. It's a team effort, and I am the team captain. Be a team player." I went to a lawyer. She was a sharp, tired woman who looked at my files and nodded. "You have a case," she said. "An intellectual property theft case. It will cost you about $80,000 in fees. It will take 3 years. And Victor Lowell will use his connections to ensure you are blacklisted from every firm west of the Mississippi. A woman suing her powerful, beloved boss for stealing an idea? She shrugged. You'll be labeled toxic, difficult, and hysterical. I remembered my mother's voice. You're strong. Strong people don't complain. So I did not. I swallowed the lawsuit. I swallowed the white-hot rage until it felt like a tumor in my gut. I packed my desk lamp and my drafting rulers. I left the firm that night in a freezing Denver fog. Without a severance, without a reference, and without my design. The Northlight Project, rebranded as the Lowell Winter Light System, won 3 national design awards for Victor Lowell the next year. But builders do not break, they just build again. I took my meager savings, the last of the scholarship money I had hoarded, and I opened my own studio, Bracken & Co. I named it after the ferns that can grow in the darkest, dampest cracks in the rocks. It was a bitter joke for myself. I found a tiny, 100-year-old warehouse space in the Rhino district, all raw brick and exposed timber. I could not afford a crew. I painted the walls myself, late at night, using buckets of expensive, low VOC paint because the air quality mattered, even if only to me. I sanded the floors until my hands bled. I built my own desks from reclaimed lumber. I got clients, small ones, dental offices, coffee shops, a yoga studio. They liked my work. It's so subtle, they would say, so thoughtful. But they were always hesitant. The contractors, all men, would listen to my detailed instructions, nod, and then ask, "Got it. So, when's the boss getting here?" The clients, when I presented the final plans and the invoice, would inevitably ask, "Great. So, who do I make the check out to? Your principal?" They could not believe I was the boss, a woman, barely 5'5", in a dusty coat and steel-toed boots, could not possibly be the principal. I was just the help. The bills piled up, the rent on the warehouse, the software licenses, the liability insurance, and then, finally, my 2 employees, a junior draftsman and an office manager. The first 2 people I had ever hired who believed in me, who called me boss. And the checks from clients were always late, always. "We're on net 60, they would say, as if I had the same massive credit lines as Lowell Studio. I learned to send invoices. At first, I was polite. Just a gentle reminder. But politeness does not pay salaries. I had to learn to build an invoice like I would build a load-bearing wall. Straight, unapologetic, no decorative flourishes. Payment is due upon receipt as per Section 4 of our signed contract. Late fees will be applied. It was hard. It felt unnatural. It felt, I realized, strong, and I hated it. Which brought me back to the snow, back to the final notice email on my phone, back to my father's cracking, icy laugh and Sable's pitying, poisonous whisper. I had built and built and built, and I had nothing. I had failed. I looked up at the old man, the snow collecting on his wool cap, his amber eyes fixed on me. "Am I a builder?" I whispered, the words tasting like blood and ice in my mouth. "I don't know. All I have ever built is a trap." The old man's amber eyes did not waver. "A trap is just a structure waiting for the right key," he said. His voice was like dry rock sliding. "Or the right architect." He pulled his plaid jacket tighter. It looked thin as paper against the blizzard. "Name's Hollis Ward. I'm the keeper of the old mountain railroad depots, or what's left of them." He placed the steel box on the stone step between us. It landed with a heavy metallic thud. It was not a clank. It was a deep, resonant sound, as if he had just set down the anchor of a ship. It sounded like it was knocking on the very bones of the mountain. He undid the clasp again, that same protesting groan of metal. "You're a builder," he said, not as a question this time. "Let's see if you can read the original blueprints." He lifted the lid fully, the wind-whipped snow inside, dusting the objects. He ignored it. He reached in with a gnarled hand and pulled out the map. It was not paper. It was old, yellowed vellum, cracked at the folds. The smell of dust and old attics and something metallic rose from it. He unrolled it across his knees, the wind trying to rip it from his grasp, but his grip was like iron. It was a cadastral map, hand-drawn with meticulous, fading blue ink. I leaned closer, my hair whipping across my face. North Slope, I read, tracing the words. Parcels 7 through 11. It was a huge tract of land, following a vein in the mountain, abutting an old defunct railroad line. 1968, I whispered, reading the date in the corner. Then I saw the signature in the approval block. It was sloping, confident, and utterly, terribly familiar. I had seen it on old checks, on the bottom of my parents' wedding portrait, on the few birthday cards I'd received as a child. Rollins, my grandfather. He and I were partners. Once, Hollis said, his voice flat. Before your father learned how to sell the foundations and just live in the facade. My head snapped up. What are you talking about? He was already reaching back into the box. He pulled out the USB drive, the one wrapped in black electrical tape. It was an ugly, functional object, starkly modern against the 19th century map. This, he said, is more recent. He held it out. His fingers were bare, the knuckles swollen, the skin cracked from the cold. You know a man named Victor Lowell? It was a statement, not a question. I flinched, a full-body reflex, as if he had just slapped me. He stole my design. He didn't steal it, Hollis said, his voice as cold as the stone step. He was given it, in trade. What trade? My voice was barely a whisper. You're the architect, Rebecca. You tell me, what does your father, Gregory Rollins, have that Victor Lowell would want? I couldn't breathe. The air was too thin, too cold. Access, I said, the word numb on my lips. Contracts, the Aspen network. He could get Victor into parties like this, introduce him to the money. And what does Victor have that your father would want? The answer was so sickening, so obvious. It rose in my throat like bile. Me, my silence, keeping me small, keeping me out of the way. That USB, Hollis said, tapping its plastic shell, holds the email chain from 2 years ago, between your father and Lowell. A neat little deal. Lowell gets the uncontested rights to a very innovative junior design, free and clear, to brand as his own. Your father gets silent shares in a new holding company Lowell set up for it, a clean trade, your work, for a quiet, profitable kickback. The world tilted. The golden lights of the chalet swam in my vision. It was not just neglect. It was not just my family's passive dismissal of my hobby. It was active. It was malice. It was theft. It was a conspiracy. A backroom deal where I was the commodity being sold. My future traded away by my own father so he could acquire another silent, invisible asset. The $7,500 I just begged him for. It was pocket change. It was less than dust. I stared at the USB, my mind a blank wall of static. Why? I finally choked out. Why are you showing me this? Hollis put the drive and the map back into the box. He closed the lid. Thud. Because, he said, standing up in one fluid, wiry motion. He was taller than I thought. You build light. I need someone who can read shadows. He looked down at me, huddled in my damp silk dress, my useless, snow-covered portfolio in my lap. I've got a place, an old railroad transfer warehouse up in Leadville. She's been empty for 30 years. Stone walls, steel trusses, good bones, but she's forgotten how to breathe. I need someone to go up there and assess her. Tell me if she's worth saving, or if she's just a pile of bricks waiting to fall. My suspicion, cold and sharp, cut through the shock. Why me? I said, my voice harsh. I'm nobody. I'm failing. My company is 2 weeks from bankruptcy. You're not failing, he said, with an absolute certainty that rattled me more than my father's laugh. You're being robbed. There's a difference. He jerked his head toward the chalet door, where the bass of the EDM was a dull, rhythmic punch against the wood. They're not builders. They're termites. They're hollowing things out from the inside. You know how to build from the ground up. I don't know you, I said, my voice shaking. This is a trap. It has to be. In the snow, on this night, every extended hand had to be a trick. Smart, he grunted. Good. Don't trust me. He kicked the side of the steel box with his boot. I squinted. Faded, white stenciled letters, barely visible. Read, Ward and Rollins Mineral. An old partnership. Your grandfather and I. It's real. It's been dormant, not dead. It's all tied to those parcels on the map. He wasn't finished. You're right not to trust me, but do you trust her? Her? Ruth Calder. My breath caught in my throat. Ruth Calder. She was a living legend, a foundational figure in high-altitude architecture. She was the one who started building with rammed earth and reclaimed steel in the 1970s, decades before it was fashionable. She was 90 years old, famously reclusive, and the only architect whose work I truly, deeply revered. She was a god. What about her? She's the one who found you, Hollis said. She saw that little community center, the real one, the blueprints you filed with the county for the initial permit, before Lowell put his name on it. She said you had it. Had what? The thing no one can steal, Hollis said. The understanding. She said you don't just see the building, you see the air inside it, you see the light. She's the one who told me. That's the girl. She's the one who can read the shadows. This hit me harder than the revelation of my father's betrayal. Ruth Calder knew my name. She had seen my work, the work I thought was buried and stolen and forgotten. Hollis Ward had offered me the one thing I was starving for. Not money, not revenge, validation. He saw the change in my face. He extended his bare, scarred hand. So, we go up the mountain tomorrow. Dawn, you look at the warehouse. If you say it's junk, I'll drive you back to Denver. I disappear. You keep the USB. It's yours. Do what you want with it. And if I stammered, my teeth chattering so hard I could barely form the word. If I say yes? If you say yes, he said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. Then I give you the third key. I looked at his hand. It was steady. I looked at the chalet door. A solid wall of oak and golden light between me and the family who had sold me. I looked at the memory of my bank balance. $2,184. I had nothing. I had nowhere to go but up. I put my frozen, shaking hand into his. His grip was like a vice, warm and strong. My truck's in the lower lot, he said, letting go. He picked up the steel box. Don't bring that. He nodded at my leather portfolio, now half buried in a snowdrift. It's full of the wrong plans. I stood. My legs were numb, my feet burning. I left the portfolio on the step. I didn't look back. I followed his thin frame down the stone steps, into the swirling, howling white. My phone was in my pocket. My fingers were claws, but I managed to pull it out and type a text to Anna, my assistant. My thumb hovered over the send button. Hollis Ward, Leadville. If I'm gone for 24 hours, call the police. I hit send and shoved the phone deep into my pocket. I climbed into the cab of an ancient, beaten-up pickup truck. The vinyl seats were cracked and colder than the stone. He got in the driver's side, carrying the box, and turned the key. The engine roared to life with a diesel growl that shook the entire frame. When he turned on the headlights, I saw the steel box sitting on the bench seat between us. It was a solid, dark mass. It was not an anchor. It was a heart, a heavy, cold, mechanical heart, waiting to be restarted. Hollis put the truck in gear. The tires spun on the ice, then bit. He drove us out of the golden light of the resort, away from the music, and into the pure, cleansing, and absolute darkness of the storm. The drive to Leadville was silent. We climbed, the old truck's diesel engine a low, laboring growl as we ascended past the tree line. The storm had broken with the dawn, and the light at 10,000 feet was not the soft, golden glow of aspen. It was a cold, chemical, and unforgiving blue. The air was so thin it hurt to breathe. Hollis navigated the sleeping, snow-choked streets of the high-altitude town, past the Victorian storefronts and miners' cottages, their chimneys all breathing steady columns of wood smoke. He drove to the edge of town, to the old, abandoned rail yards. He killed the engine. The sudden silence was vast, broken only by the shriek of the wind over the frozen metal. "This is her," he said. It was not one building, but a long, massive complex of red brick. It sat parallel to the tracks, a monument of faded, frozen blood red against the white snow. The arched windows were enormous, cathedral-like, but the glass was long gone, the openings sealed with sheets of ice. Above the roofline, the exposed steel trusses of a gantry crane stood dark and skeletal against the pale, unforgiving sky. We got out. The cold was a physical thing. It was not the damp, cinematic cold of Aspen. It was a dry, sharp cold that felt like needles in my lungs. Hollis took a heavy, ancient-looking key from his pocket and moved toward a steel side door. The door groaned, a sound of metal scraping metal, and he pushed it open into darkness. The first thing that hit me was the sound. The wind, finding its way through the broken windows and gaps in the roof, was howling. It was not a whistle. It was a deep, resonant, harmonic moan. The building was singing. It was vast inside, a cathedral of industry. The light was thin and blue, falling in shafts from the high, broken windows. Snow had drifted into massive piles on the concrete floor, covering old, dormant machinery and stacks of rotted pallets. Pigeons scattered from the high rafters, their wings a flurry of panicked echoes. Hollis stood by the door, watching me. I left him, walking deeper into the nave. My feet crunched on the frozen snow. I looked up, tracing the lines of the massive, riveted steel I-beams that spanned the entire width of the space. They were covered in a fine layer of rust, but it was surface rust, the color of dried blood, not the deep, flaking rot of decay. I reached up, my bare fingers just brushing the flange of the nearest column. The steel was so cold it burned, a sharp, clean sting, and I felt it, beneath the sting, beneath the howl of the wind. I felt a low, resonant vibration. It was the sound of the building settling, of the trusses expanding and contracting in the extreme cold, of the entire structure holding its ground against the mountain. It was the sound of tension, of physics, of something that was still, after all these years, doing its job. "This frame," I whispered, the words stolen by the wind. "This frame still wants to stand." I turned back to Hollis. He hadn't moved. His amber eyes were fixed on me. "Well?" he asked, his voice rough. "Is she junk?" I shook my head, my mind already racing, the cold forgotten. The blueprints were unfolding in my head. "No," I said, my voice suddenly clear and loud, cutting through the wind's moan. "She's not junk. She doesn't know what she is anymore. She's forgotten how to breathe." I started pacing. The old humiliation of the party, the sting of my father's betrayal, all of it burning away, replaced by a sudden, hot clarity. "This main hall," I said, pointing. "This is for work. The concrete slab is thick enough to hold heavy machinery. This is a community woodshop, a place where people can learn to build again." I pointed to the lofts above, the old foreman's offices, their windows shattered. "That's the housing, a dormitory, for interns, for apprentices, for kids who can't afford $1,000 a night in Vail." I walked to the south wall, the one that was still mostly intact, the one that would get the sun. "And this is the studio." The idea hit me like a physical blow, a bolt of lightning. A winter light studio, a place to teach how to build with the sun, how to capture warmth from the cold. I looked at Hollis, my heart hammering. "My Northlight design, it belongs here. A community woodshop, a winter light studio, and a place for apprentices to live. A self-contained ecosystem." "She doesn't just want to stand," I said, my voice shaking with the force of the idea. She wants to work. Hollis grunted, a sound of deep satisfaction. Good. You see the bones. Now, come see the memory. He led me to a heavy steel door in the back corner, one I had missed in the gloom. It was painted the same chipped green as his box. He took one of the keys from the rusted ring, the first key, and thrust it into the lock. It took his entire wiry strength to turn it. The tumblers fell with a series of heavy thunks. He pulled the door open. The smell that rolled out was not mold or decay. It was the sharp, clean, dry scent of old paper, leather, and pine resin. It was an archive. Floor-to-ceiling wooden shelves, crammed with dusty, leather-bound ledgers and tightly rolled vellum blueprints. The heart of the railroad, Hollis said. He pulled down a heavy, cracking roll and spread it on a table. It was a foundation plan, dated 1901. Silver era. They built this place on bedrock, built it to hold the weight of the mountain. I was tracing the delicate, hand-drawn lines, the ink still a faint blue, when a new voice, a woman's voice, spoke from the doorway. It was dry and raspy, like old parchment. She always did have a good eye for bedrock, better than her father's. I spun around. A woman was standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the blue light of the warehouse. She was ancient, her white hair pulled back in a tight, no-nonsense bun. She was wearing men's overalls, a thick wool sweater, and her hands were stained black with charcoal. My mind went blank. I knew that face. I had only seen it in magazines and textbooks. Ruth? I whispered. It was Ruth Calder. She stepped into the dim light of the archive, her eyes, bright and fiercely intelligent, pinning me in place. You finally made it. Rebecca, she said. Hollis, she's smaller than I imagined. Hollis, I stammered, looking between them. She's... Ruth lives up the valley, Hollis said, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. She's the one who's been keeping the main roof from caving in. She's the one who told me to find you. Ruth Calder ignored this. She walked past me, her boots sure on the dusty floor. Hollis said you were a builder. I said you were an architect. Let's see which one is true. She wasted no time. She grabbed a piece of charcoal from her overall pocket, knelt on the concrete floor, and began to sketch. Her movements sharp and economical. Here's your problem, she said, her voice a low rasp. Ventilation, altitude. It'll be 10 degrees below zero tonight. Your community woodshop will be running saws, dust. You bring in fresh air. You freeze your workers to death. You recirculate the air. They choke on fine particulates. Your pretty winter light is useless if the air kills them. Solve it. It was a test, a brutal, brilliant, practical test. My mind, so foggy with failure just hours before, was now sharp as the cold. I knelt opposite her. You don't fight the cold, I said, my voice finding its strength. You use it. You build a heat exchange core. Expensive, she snorted. A modern box that will fail in 5 years. Not a box, I said. You build it into the structure, a thermal mass wall. I pointed to the south-facing wall. We run the fresh air intake through coiled pipes, embedded in a new, dark-colored concrete wall, right behind the south glass. The sun preheats the concrete, which preheats the air. Passive. I took the charcoal from her hand. Her skin was like paper. I began to draw, the lines coming fast. But the intake is the key. You don't just punch a hole. You use the louvers, my louvers. The idea came, fully formed, a translation of the principle. You angle them, not for light, for wind. You set them at 7.5 degrees. It creates a Venturi effect at the roofline. It cuts the wind speed but increases the static pressure, forcing the air down into the heating core instead of just skimming over the top. It's the Northlight principle. But for air. I finished the sketch. I was breathing hard. The silence in the room was absolute, save for the moan of the wind outside. Ruth Calder stared at my drawing on the floor. She did not smile. She just gave a single, sharp nod. Lowell never would have thought of that, she said, her voice flat. He only knows how to copy. He doesn't know how to translate. She looked up, and her eyes met mine. That design, the Northlight, it's yours. It always was. He can keep his awards. You keep the physics. She got to her feet, her joints cracking. Now it's yours, Rebecca, not theirs, and you'll build it here, where it belongs. That was the moment the project was born. The if evaporated. All that was left was how. We need a contractor, I said, my voice still shaky. Someone who understands this, who won't just gut it and spray foam everything, someone who respects the materials. I know a man, Hollis said, nodding. Noah Mercer. His great-grandfather cut the original timber for this rail line. Noah's been reclaiming wood from collapsed barns for 20 years. He's honest, and he hates Aspen. Hollis made a call on a satellite phone that looked as old as the truck. An hour later, another truck pulled up. Noah Mercer was my age, quiet, with shoulders as broad as the timber he worked with. He walked the space for a full 30 minutes without saying a word. He ran his hand over a rotted beam, crumbled the dry rot between his fingers, then moved to a steel truss. Finally, he spoke. We can save 80% of the timber, he said, his voice quiet. The rest, the rot, we can use it to fire a small kiln. To cure the new wood, nothing is wasted. The team was set. Me, for design and light. Ruth, for structure and ethics. Hollis, for the land and the paper. And Noah, for the timber and the labor. We stood in the center of the vast, cold room as the afternoon light began to fade. It needs a name, Noah said. I looked out the broken archway, toward the mountains. The setting sun lit up the high peaks. Snowline, I said. It's the boundary, the line where the snow stops, and the mountain begins, where the cold meets the thing that can withstand it. Snowline works, Ruth added, her voice firm. It's a place of labor, a workshop, not a gallery. Noah found an old, cracked whiteboard in the archive. I picked up a dried-out marker and wrote the name. Underneath it, I paused. I thought of Victor's flashy presentations, my father's booming voice, the endless noise of their world. I wrote, build quiet, let the results be the noise. None of us left that night. The energy was too high, the cold too deep to face alone. Noah and Hollis fired up an old cast-iron pot-belly stove in the archive room. We sat on upturned buckets and wooden planks, sharing a thermos of coffee that tasted like burnt motor oil. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. We laid out sleeping bags on the dusty floor. That night, I slept surrounded by the smell of pine resin, old paper, and wood smoke. Outside, the snow began to fall again. It wasn't the soft, gentle snow of Aspen. It was hard, tiny pellets, hitting the metal roof. It sounded like 1,000 new rivets being hammered into the sky, fastening us to this place. Before we turned in, Hollis placed the green steel box in the center of our circle. No one said anything. I reached out and put my hand on the cold steel lid. A moment later, Ruth's hand, stained black with charcoal, covered mine, then Noah's, calloused and wide, joined. Finally, Hollis laid his scarred, gnarled hand on top of the pile. 4 hands on a steel box. It was a silent oath. No one would touch the heart of this project. No one would sell the foundations. We would build. The first shot was fired, as I knew it would be. It did not come from a rifle, but from a law firm in Denver. We had been at the warehouse for a week of sleeping on the floor, of cataloging the archive, of Noah and his small team beginning the careful, surgical demolition of the rotted sections. The air no longer smelled of just dust and decay. It smelled of sawed wood, welding ozone, and hot coffee. We had purpose. Then my phone, plugged into a gas generator, rang. It was my father. "Rebecca," he said. His voice was not the false, booming warmth of the party. It was the cold, flat monotone he used for hostile negotiations. "What do you think you are doing?" "I'm at a job site, Dad," I said, my own voice steady. I was standing on the gantry crane, looking down at the vast floor. You are in Leadville, with Hollis Ward. That is what you are doing. You are digging up things that were buried, Rebecca. Things that are not your concern. Whose concern are they, Dad? A sharp intake of breath. You are being incredibly foolish. I am calling our lawyers. This project of yours, whatever you are doing with that old man, it stops. You are trespassing on Rollins family property. Am I? I asked. I am warning you, as your father. Shut this down. Come home. We can fix this. We can fix you. The offer hung in the air, cold and empty. We can fix you. The implication was clear. I was the broken one. I'm not broken, Dad, I said, and hung up. The second shot came 2 days later. A courier on a snowmobile delivered it. A thick, creamy envelope with the embossed logo of Victor Lowell's law firm. It was a cease and desist letter. We gathered in the archive room, the pot-belly stove radiating a circle of warmth. I read the letter aloud. It was 20 pages of dense, threatening legalese. It accused me, Rebecca Rollins, of intellectual property theft, of trademark infringement, and of maliciously attempting to replicate his proprietary, award-winning Lowell Winter Light System. He was accusing me of stealing my own design. He demanded an immediate halt to the Snowline Works project, a public apology, and the surrender of all my blueprints, digital files, and notes. When I finished, the room was silent. Noah looked like he was ready to drive an axe through something. Hollis just stared into the stove's red glow. Ruth Calder, however, smiled. It was a thin, dry, dangerous smile. Good, she said, sipping her coffee. The fish is big, and he's showing us all his bait. He's going to sue us into the ground, I said, the letter shaking in my hand. We have nothing. I have $2,000 to my name. This is a ghost, and he's bringing an army. He's bringing an army to fight a ghost. Yes, Hollis said, his voice a low rumble. He thinks he's fighting you. Rebecca, a broke, disowned designer. He thinks you're on his territory. He stood up and walked to the green steel box, which sat on the main desk like a votive. He took out the second key from the ring. It was smaller than the archive key, made of brass. He's right about one thing. Your father is right about one thing, Hollis said. This is about property, so let's establish who owns the property. He led us to a filing cabinet I had overlooked, one made of steel, not wood. He unlocked the top drawer. Inside was a single, leather-bound ledger. He opened it. The document was crisp, the ink dark. It was a mineral rights and land use agreement, signed in 1968. The signatures were there. My grandfather and Hollis Ward. Ward and Rollins Mineral, Hollis said, his finger tracing the text. The partnership was dissolved in 1984. Your grandfather kept the structures, the warehouses. I kept the mineral rights beneath them. But there was a reversion clause. Your grandfather and I, we didn't trust your father. Even then, we knew he was a seller, not a builder. He pointed to a specific paragraph. The surface rights, the buildings, the land they sit on, they would remain with the Rollins family only as long as they were used for industrial purposes. If they sat dormant, unused, for a period of 20 consecutive years. He looked up at me, his amber eyes bright. The clock started the day your grandfather's company shut down the line. That was 21 years ago. The Rollins family property your father is screaming about, it reverted to me, Hollis Ward, as the holder of the underlying mineral rights 365 days ago. He closed the ledger. Victor Lowell isn't just suing a ghost. He's suing the wrong person, on the wrong land. I felt the floor shift beneath my feet, but this time, I was not falling. I was landing. We need to protect it, I said, my mind racing. We need to protect you, Hollis. They'll come after you now. We protect the work, Ruth corrected me, her voice sharp. The work is the only thing that matters. That afternoon, I drove Hollis's truck into town and used the public library's internet. I spent my last $2,000. I drained my bank account to pay a lawyer in Denver, a young, hungry one recommended by Ruth, who specialized in environmental and land use law. We formed a legal entity, a nonprofit trust. We called it the Snowline Trust. Hollis signed the land, the warehouses, the entire industrial parcel, over to the trust, his contribution. I was named the managing director. My contribution was the design, the intellectual property of the Northlight system, which I formally registered under the trust's name. Ruth and Noah sat on the board. The trust's stated mission, etched in clear, ironclad language, was the preservation and revitalization of Colorado's industrial heritage through sustainable design and community apprenticeship. We were not a private company. We were not a target for a corporate lawsuit. We were a public interest trust, and we were standing on our own land. We sent a copy of our new land title and our articles of incorporation to Victor Lowell's lawyers. The response was silence, a deep, cold, calculating silence. But the work continued. Noah's team moved in. They were not a typical construction crew. They were artisans. They moved with a quiet respect for the old building. When they had to remove a rotted timber beam, one that was beyond saving, Noah would inspect it, find the intact heartwood, and set it aside. "This is for the new benches," he'd say. "This is for the tool handles." He taught his crew to find the beautiful scars, places where the old machinery had gouged the brick, or where a fire had licked a steel beam, staining it a deep, iridescent blue. "We don't hide that," he told them. "We clean it. We frame it. That's the building's memory. That's honest." We were building an aesthetic of truth. The silence from Aspen broke, but not through legal channels. It came, as it always did, through whispers. The rumors started at the ski lifts and in the expensive bars. "Did you hear about Gregory Rollins's older daughter? The crazy one? She's shacked up with some old miner in Leadville. They're trying to, I don't know, vet her grandfather's old mineral assets, trying to cut the family out." The narrative was set. I was the ungrateful, mentally unstable daughter, trying to steal the family fortune. Sable, predictably, made it worse. She posted a live stream. I watched it on my phone, huddled by the generator. She was in her new Vale chalet, in front of a roaring fire, her face a mask of practiced concern. "I just want to address these awful rumors about my sister," she said, her voice trembling. "Rebecca is she's very creative, and sometimes she gets lost. My father is so worried. She's involved with some strange people, and we just want her to come home safely. The Rollins family has no interest in those old, dirty mines. We've moved on." Her defense painted me as a helpless, brainwashed victim. It was, in its own way, more vicious than Victor's lawsuit. The noise brought new attention. An email appeared in the trust's new inbox. It was from a private equity firm in Zurich, an anonymous partner. They had heard whispers of a significant industrial heritage project and were intrigued by the potential. They wanted a meeting. The old me would have been desperate, falling over myself to prove my worth. The new me, the director of the Snowline Trust, wrote one sentence back. "We do not take meetings. We accept formal proposals, but only after you have signed the attached non-disclosure agreement, drafted by our counsel." I attached the NDA Ruth's lawyer had drawn up. It was a dragon. It had teeth that could bite through steel. We never heard from them again. Victor finally showed his hand. He could not attack us on land rights. He could not attack us as a corporation, so he came after the only thing he thought I had, my reputation. He hired an influencer, a man who ran one of the biggest architectural blogs in the country, a man famous for his sleek, minimalist, and very expensive taste. He suddenly published a long, retrospective piece on my old, small, pre-Lowell projects. He called my work derivative, naively optimistic, and lacking the rigorous, market-tested authority of a mature studio. He called me a style-over-substance designer who, while quaint, was fundamentally an amateur. He never mentioned Snowline. He did not have to. He was poisoning the well. He was defining me. publicly, as a hack. I read it, and the old, familiar shame felt like ice in my veins. Ruth read it, too. She just snorted. She went to the library, and 2 days later, she published a guest essay on a small, respected academic journal's website. She did not mention Victor. She did not mention me. She just wrote, "Style is a conversation about the present. Structure is a conversation with time. The market rewards the former. The mountain respects the latter." She then included a 2,000-word, deeply technical analysis of 19th century railroad truss design, comparing it to the hollow core facade-first building practices of modern resorts. She finished with one line, "Foundations do not lie, and they do not care about your blog." The final attack came on a Tuesday, at 3 in the afternoon. A white state vehicle pulled up, and a man in a hard hat and a high-visibility vest stepped out. He was the county safety inspector. It was a surprise inspection, a death sentence for most new projects. This was their checkmate. They could not sue me. They could not shame me. So they would shut me down with code violations. The inspector was an older man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles. He looked tired. "Got an anonymous tip," he said, his voice gravel. "Reports of an unsafe, unpermitted structure. Heard you had people living in here. Asbestos, lead, structural instability." Victor and my father had thrown everything at us. "We're not living here," I said, my heart pounding. "We are restoring it, and we are permitted." I handed him our file, not just the new trust incorporation, but the original, 1901 blueprints from the archive. "And," I said, "we've been running our own tests." I led him to the wall where Noah had begun his work. "We've had the air tested, no asbestos, the brick is clean." I pointed to the thermal sensors I had embedded in the wall, the same kind I used in my passive solar designs. "And we've been monitoring the core temperature of the structural beams. The frame is sound." I handed him the site journal, a thick-bound book, every day, every test, every small repair, documented. He was silent. He spent 2 hours walking the entire structure. He climbed the gantry. He went into the archive. He looked at my new sketches, taped to the wall, for the louvers and the heat exchange core. He looked at Noah's careful stacks of reclaimed timber. He came back to me, holding his clipboard. He made a few notes. I held my breath. He could shut us down. He could fine us into oblivion. He signed the bottom of his form. Then he paused. He took a small pencil from behind his ear, and at the bottom of the official, typed report, he wrote one small line in a clear practice script. He handed the carbon copy to me. I looked down. Below all the checked boxes and the official signature, he had written, "This place breathes well." We held the soft opening on a Tuesday in late winter, the coldest day of the year. It was not a party. There was no champagne, no string quartet. We just opened the doors. We had finished the first phase, the main hall and the south-facing studio. The roof was patched. The new, triple-glazed windows were in, and the north light facade, my facade, was complete. It stood facing the mountain, a precise, calculated array of louvers and glass, angled at exactly 7.5 degrees. The sun rose over the peaks, and the light hit the louvers. It was not a beam. It was not a spotlight. It was a flood. The system caught the low-angle winter light, the weak, cold, blue-tinged sun, and performed its alchemy. It funneled the light inward, bouncing it off the high, newly polished concrete floors, reflecting it off the light shelves we had built into the trusses. The light did not glare. It diffused. It was soft, even, and impossibly, unbelievably warm. The entire, vast, cold, brick and steel cavern was filled with bright, clear, warm daylight. It felt like standing inside a perfectly cut diamond. The air itself seemed to have color. Ruth Calder stood in the center of the hall, her hands clasped behind her back. She turned her face up to the light. Her eyes closed. She did not say a word. She just breathed it in. From the newly insulated woodshop, the sounds began. Not the scream of industrial saws, but the rhythmic, patient sounds of hand tools, the shh of a hand plane over pine, the thwack of a wooden mallet on a chisel. Noah had started the apprenticeship program before we were even finished. He had a dozen local teenagers, kids from Leadville whose families had been miners, then baristas, then unemployed, kids who had nowhere to go after school. They were in the shop, their brows furrowed in concentration, learning to cut dovetail joints. There was no yelling, no pressure, just Noah, moving between their workbenches, his voice low, his big hands guiding their smaller ones. He was teaching them how to join two pieces of wood so they would hold forever. He was teaching them structure. He was teaching them patience. In the corner, where the new plumbing core met the south wall, I had built my winter garden. It was a test, a small, interior biosphere, fed by the building's own recycled gray water. In the warm, bright, humid air, mosses and frost-hardy ferns were already uncurling. The mist from the humidifier caught the north light and broke it into a dozen tiny, faint rainbows that danced on the old brick. We had built a place that was alive. The test, however, was the county board. They controlled the final permits, the grants, the project's future. We presented to them 2 days later in a sterile, fluorescent-lit room in the county courthouse. The board members looked tired, skeptical. They had heard the rumors. They looked at me, a 32-year-old woman in a wool coat, and saw a problem. I did not use a projector. I did not have a flashy slideshow. I unrolled a single blueprint, my own hand-drafted plan for the heat exchange core, and laid it on their table. "Good morning," I said, my voice clear in the small room. "My name is Rebecca Rollins, and I am the director of the Snowline Trust. What we are building is not a monument. It is not a resort. It is a tool." I pointed to the blueprint. "It is a structure designed to teach. It will heat itself, using nothing but the sun and the physics of the mountain. It will house apprentices, who will learn to build. It will provide workshop space for anyone who wants to learn to make, instead of just buy." The board chairman, a man with a heavy silver belt buckle, interrupted me. "Ms. Rollins, that's all very nice, but it's a very large, very old, very cold building. It's a statement. It's art, maybe. But Leadville needs jobs. It doesn't need a statement." I looked him in the eye. I thought of my father's gleaming, empty chalet. I thought of Victor's stolen, empty awards. "A building doesn't ask to be loved," I said, my voice quiet, but it filled the room. "It asks to be used. We are not building a statement. We are building a workshop. We are not here to be looked at. We are here to work." Silence. I finished the presentation. They voted. The yes was unanimous. When we returned to the warehouse, a small group of men was waiting for us by the door. They were older, in their 60s and 70s, wearing worn-out Carhartt jackets and faded Union caps. They were the old miners, the ones who had worked this yard before it died. They had heard about the board meeting. They did not speak to me. They walked inside, their boots hesitant on the clean floor. They looked up at the light. They looked at the apprentices in the wood shop. One of them, a man with a face like a dried riverbed, walked to the main brick wall, the one Noah's crew had so carefully cleaned and repointed. He took off his glove. He laid his bare, scarred hand flat against the brick. He just held it there. His eyes closed. I saw his shoulders shake, just once. He was feeling the building's heartbeat. He was feeling his own memory, his own purpose, given back to him. That was the only validation I needed. The work accelerated. The project was no longer just mine. It belonged to the town. Noah came to me, his hands dusty. "We need to start a new class," he said. "We're full," I replied, looking at the apprentice schedule. "Not for them, for the old-timers, for the homeowners." He gestured toward the town. "People are living in 100-year-old houses. Their heating bills are killing them. They're freezing. We are in a construction site that is also a school. Let's teach them. A cold home repair class, how to insulate an attic, how to seal a window, how to read a thermal leak. A construction site that is a school. The idea was beautiful. Put up a sign-up sheet, I said. It was full in an hour. The local paper, the Leadville Chronicle, ran a story. It was a simple, quarter-page article. The reporter, a young woman, had just interviewed the old miners. The headline was not what I expected. It did not mention the Rollins name. It did not mention Victor Lowell. It said, "A woman builds warmth from cold steel." That was when the outside world, the world I had left behind in the snow, came knocking again. The first was the investor, the anonymous firm from Zurich that I had ignored. This time, they sent a lawyer in a $1,000 suit, all the way to Leadville. He arrived in a black sedan that looked offended by the snow. He found me in the archive, cataloging blueprints. He did not introduce himself. "My clients are prepared to make a final offer," he said, adjusting his cuffs. "They will finance the entire completion of your project, a full build-out. They are prepared to offer $10 million. I kept stamping the blueprints. In exchange for what? A controlling interest. Of course, 51% of the trust. My clients will handle the business side. You will be free to create. 51%. The language of Victor, the language of my father, the language of ownership, of control. I put the stamp down. The Snowline Trust is not for sale. The lawyer sighed, annoyed. "Ms. Rollins, be realistic. This is a one-time offer." "Then I will be clear one time," I said, looking up at him. "The answer is 0%. Not now, not ever. The work is not for sale." He left. I went back to the blueprints. The second knock was a text message, from Sable. I had not spoken to my sister, my father, or my mother since that night in Aspen. The text, after months of silence, was jarring. "Hi, Becky. Wow. We're hearing a lot of buzz, even down here. That little newspaper article was cute. Listen, I've been talking to a producer at a lifestyle network. They love the woman builder in the mountains angle. I think we could do some amazing media collaboration, really control the narrative. Let me know." I stared at the message. Media collaboration. Control the narrative. She was still speaking the language of Aspen, the language of facades. I typed one sentence back and hit send. Collaborate for what? She did not reply. That night, the four of us were in the archive. The stove was burning hot. Noah was sketching a new joint. Ruth was reading a book on metallurgy. I was drafting the plan for the new apprenticeship dorms. Hollis, who had been quiet all evening, stood up. He walked to the steel box, which now sat permanently on the archive desk. "I think it's time," he said. We all looked up. He was holding the last, strangest key from the ring. It was not iron, it was polished steel, like a modern key, but thick and heavy. Etched into the bow of the key were two words, Rollins Switch. "Time for what?" Noah asked. "The third key," Hollis said. "Your grandfather, Rebecca. He built this place, but he built traps. He built fail-safes. He knew your father. He knew what he was. He knew he was a seller." Hollis led us from the archive, into the main warehouse. The moonlight was now pouring through my Northlight windows. A cold, perfect, silver flood. He walked to the far corner, a place we had not touched, where the old gantry crane controls were still bolted to the floor. "He showed me this," Hollis said. "The day before he left for Wyoming, he said, 'If it all goes wrong, Hollis, if my boy sells the soul of this place, the real ledger is in the floor, but don't open it. Not until the right builder comes. Not until you find the one who knows how to look against the wind.'" Hollis knelt. He pulled on a section of the concrete floor that I had assumed was a drain cover. It was not. It was a heavy steel-plated trapdoor, its edges perfectly hidden in the concrete. He lifted it. Beneath it was not a crawl space. It was a small, dry, concrete-lined void. And in that void sat a box. It was not steel. It was wood, dark and heavy, wrapped in thick, oiled sailcloth, a safe. Hollis put the key in the lock. He turned it. The click was loud in the vast, silent hall. He lifted the lid. Ruth held her flashlight, its beam cutting into the darkness. My heart was not pounding. It was steady. It was quiet. It was waiting. Inside, there were only 2 items. The first was a thick, simple, handwritten ledger, the kind a shop foreman would use. I opened it. It was my grandfather's hand. It was not a book of assets. It was a book of debts, not debts he owed, but debts owed to him, quiet loans to miners, promises from suppliers, and, on the last page, a long, detailed entry of all the money Gregory Rollins, my father, had taken from the company before it was shut down, listed as a temporary loan that was never repaid. The second item was an envelope. It was thick, creamy vellum, like the cease and desist letter, but this was old. It was sealed with a single, dark red wax seal, stamped with the Rollins family crest. On the front, in my grandfather's sloping, confident hand, was my name. No, it was not my name. It was an address. It said, "To the grandchild who knows how to look against the wind." My fingers, numb from the cold of the vault, closed around the envelope. The wax seal was cold and brittle. It was stamped with the Rollins crest, an image of a mountain and a pickaxe I had only seen on my father's expensive stationery. I carried it back to the archive room, to the circle of warmth from the potbelly stove. Ruth, Hollis, and Noah watched me. I held the envelope to the light, to the grandchild who knows how to look against the wind. I broke the seal. It snapped with a dry, sharp crack, like a dead twig. The letter inside was not long. The handwriting was my grandfather's, the same sloping, confident hand I had seen on the 1968 map. I read it aloud, my voice sounding strange and small in the cavernous room. "If you are reading this, then you are the one I waited for, and I am sorry for the fight I left you." He wrote that he had spent his life building the railroad, the mines, the warehouses. He believed they were tools, not monuments. In 1980, when the mines were playing out, he had put forth a plan to his partners and to his son, Gregory. He wanted to convert the Leadville yards, not to sell them for scrap, but to turn them into a high-altitude trade school, a place to retrain the miners whose lungs were giving out, a place for their children to learn a new skill. "My son Gregory," I read, my voice faltering, "saw this plan and called it sentiment. He saw the yards and saw only salvage value. He saw the past as something to be liquidated. He vetoed the plan. He wanted the cash. He wanted to use the assets to leverage his way into the new world, the world of ski resorts and empty vacation homes." The letter went on. My grandfather, knowing he was beaten, made a choice. He dissolved the partnership. He gave Gregory the facade, the deeds to the buildings, the physical structures, but he gave the true power to Hollis. He entrusted Hollis with the reversionary clause on the land and the real ledgers. "I have instructed Hollis to keep them safe." I read, my throat tight. "He is to wait. He is to wait for the one in my bloodline who proves they are a builder, not a seller. He is to wait for the grandchild who does not demand a seat at the table, but who simply demands the light." I stopped. I looked at Ruth, my north light. He could not have known. It was impossible. But he had. I read the last paragraph. "The ledger in this box shows the money Gregory borrowed from the company accounts to begin his new life. It is a debt he never repaid. The interest on this debt is not financial. It is moral. Take their laughter, their comfort, their insulated ease, and use it as the interest to pay back the forgotten ones." The letter ended there. The paper fell from my hand onto the table, next to the heavy, damning ledger. The room was silent. I looked at Hollis. His face was a mask, his amber eyes fixed on the flames in the stove. "You knew," I whispered, "all this time." Hollis nodded slowly, his gaze still distant. "I've been looking for you, Rebecca, for almost 20 years. I watched your father build his empire in Aspen, all of it balanced on the head of this pin. on this unpaid debt. I watched him sell off every piece of his father's legacy, everything but this yard, which he'd forgotten he even owned. He looked at me. I knew he had 2 daughters. One was Loud. She was always in the paper, the Star. The other was quiet. I couldn't find her. Then I heard about an architect, a young woman in Denver, with the right name. I asked Ruth to find you. I turned to Ruth. She was cleaning the charcoal from beneath her nails with a small knife, her expression severe. You knew? I asked her. You've been watching me? I told him not to find you, Ruth said, her voice a flat rasp. I felt the blood drain from my face. What? I told him to wait, she said, not looking up from her knife. I went to Denver. I saw you. You were working at Lowell's studio. You were brilliant, and you were a fool. You were building for his approval, for your father's approval. You were still trying to earn a seat at their table. She looked up, her eyes pinning me. I saw the initial Northlight filing, the one you filed with the county before Victor stole it. I knew you were the one. You were the one who understood the light, and I told Hollis to wait. You let him steal it from me, I said, the words cold. You let them lock me out. You needed to be stolen from, she said, her voice hard as the steel outside. You needed to lose. You needed to be locked out in the cold, with nothing but your own work. You had to learn that their table was worthless before you could build your own. You had to be forged, Rebecca. And the mountain doesn't make steel by being gentle. I stared at her, at Hollis, at Noah, who sat, silent, watching this unfold. They had let it happen. They had watched me fail, watched me freeze, all of it a test. But it was not a test of my skill. It was a test of my soul. I looked at the letter from my grandfather, a man I had never met. I looked at Hollis, the guardian of the oath. I looked at Ruth, the iron-willed mentor. I looked at Noah, the honest builder. This was my lineage. This was my inheritance, not the $1.2 million chalet in Vail, not the name in the society pages. This, a cold warehouse, a handwritten ledger, and a group of people who did not sell their souls, a family, forged in integrity. I finally understood. I was not the girl who had been left in the snow. I was the grandchild who knew how to look against the wind. As if the thought had summoned the devil. My phone, charging on the generator, buzzed on the table, a text message. The name on the screen made my stomach clench. Victor Lowell. I opened it. His arrogance rolled off the screen in waves. Friday, 3 p.m., the Alpine Club, Aspen. We are officially announcing the Northlight 2.0, my masterpiece. I suggest you come. You might learn something. He was not just stealing my work. He was creating a sequel. He was turning my soul into a franchise. He thought I was beaten, a quaint designer, as his hired blogger had said, a joke. I read the text aloud to the room. Noah stood up, his chair scraping the concrete. He looked like he wanted to break something. A masterpiece, I said. I looked at the ledger. I looked at the USB drive Hollis had given me, the one with the emails between Victor and my father, the silent shares for my stolen design. I looked at my grandfather's letter. A smile touched my lips. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of an architect who has just finished the load calculations and knows, with absolute certainty, that the foundation is sound. I'll go, I said. I'll be there. Not alone, you won't, Noah said, his voice a low growl. This is the results. This is the noise you wrote on the board. We should all be there. Ruth nodded, a slow, grim finality in her eyes. Yes, it's time to show them what patience looks like. It is time to show them what real structure is. Then we bring the archive, Hollis said. He stood and put his hand on the green steel box. Your father, Victor, they need to see the original ledger. They need to see the box. He picked it up. Someone needs to see it first. My phone rang again. The name on the screen made my blood run cold. Sable. I had not heard her voice in months. I let it ring. The sound an alien. Shrill invasion in our quiet, dusty archive. Answer it, Ruth said, her voice flat. The weak parts of a structure always fail first. See where the crack is. I picked up the phone. My hand was steady. Sable? It was not her sweet, poisonous whisper. It was not her condescending, pitying tone. It was a raw, ragged, gulping sob. Becky? Oh God, Becky, is that you? She was hysterical. What's wrong, Sable? It's gone. Becky, it's all gone, she wailed. The chalet, the Vale chalet, the 1.2 million, it's frozen. I stood very still. What do you mean, frozen? The bank, the investors, they're saying fraud, she shrieked, the word tearing from her throat. They're saying the money Dad used to secure it. It wasn't his, it was collateral. And now it's worthless. And they're investigating all of us. The reporters are calling. Dad won't answer his phone. What is happening? I closed my eyes. The pieces snapped into place with the cold, hard logic of a steel trap. The silent shares from Victor, my father, Gregory, had likely used his anticipated, fraudulent earnings from my design as collateral for the loan on her chalet. But we had just filed the articles for the Snowline Trust. We had just, quietly, put a legal claim on the very land that underpinned the entire deal. The foundation was gone. His whole house of cards was falling. Rebecca, please, she begged. You're the smart one. You're the builder. You have to fix this. What do I do? I looked at Victor's text message on my screen. Friday, 3 p.m., the Alpine Club. Sable, I said. My voice was calm. It was colder than the aspen snow. It was the coldest thing in the room. Stop crying. Where are you? I'm at the condo in Aspen, she sniffed. I'm supposed to be at the Alpine Club on Friday. Victor is making some big announcement. Dad said, he said we all had to be there to show a united front. A united front? Perfect. Good, I said. I'll be there too. Stop calling Dad. Stop talking to the reporters and meet me there. Will you fix it? She whispered, her voice a child's, desperate and small. Will you make it stop? I'm coming to clear up the truth, I said. I hung up the phone. I looked at Hollis, holding the steel box, at Ruth, her eyes sharp, at Noah, his jaw set. It's time, I said. It's time to go back to Aspen. We did not arrive like guests. We arrived like an audit. The Alpine Club in Aspen was a temple of glass, steel, and reflections. It was a building designed to look at itself, built with money, not with purpose. The grand presentation hall was full. The air was warm, smelling of expensive catering and perfume. This was Victor Lowell's audience. Investors in soft cashmere, architects in severe black, media personalities who traded in aesthetics, not ethics. We took the back row, Hollis, in his worn plaid jacket, Ruth, in her practical wool, and Noah, quiet and solid as the beams he reclaimed. Hollis placed the green steel box on the polished concrete floor beneath his chair. It made no sound. It was an anchor in a room full of ghosts. Noah set up a small, high-definition camera on a discreet tripod. He was not here as a guest. He was here as a witness. I kept my Leadville coat on. It was my armor. At precisely 3 o'clock, Victor Lowell walked onto the stage. He was beautiful, in that sharp, expensive, predatory way. He smiled, and the room smiled with him. He was the team captain. The slide that flashed onto the massive screen behind him was simple, elegant, and the most violent act of aggression I had ever seen. Northlight TM 2.0. Thank you. Thank you. Victor beamed, pacing the stage. We are on the verge of a revolution in high-altitude living, a way to integrate the cold, the snow, the mountain itself, into a warm, synergistic lifestyle. He spoke for 10 minutes, using words like biometric, harmonious, and curated. He was selling a feeling, a brand. Then, the renderings appeared. My breath caught. It was not just my original design, it was the evolution. It was the ventilation solution I had sketched on the floor for Ruth. It was the thermal mass wall. It was the 7.5-degree louver calculation. He had somehow gotten his hands on my new work, my snowline work, and was presenting it as his 2.0 version. By fine-tuning the angles, he said, gesturing to my math, I have created a passive system that not only captures light, but breathes. It preheats the air, creating a net-zero thermal event. This is the Lowell Winter Light System, perfected. This is my masterpiece. He was explaining my physics to me. He was selling my soul and calling it his own. I stood up. My chair scraping the floor was the only sound in the wrapped room. Victor paused, mid-sentence, annoyed by the interruption. I began to walk down the central aisle, toward the stage. An organizer in a headset hurried toward me, a wireless microphone in her hand. Ma'am, the Q&A is after the presentation. I am not here for the Q&A, I said, my voice perfectly level. I took the microphone from her unresisting hand. Victor, I said, my voice echoed, clear and cold, through the speakers. He shielded his eyes, trying to find me in the glare. Rebecca? What a dynamic surprise. Good to see you. How are things in Leadville? The condescension dripped from his voice. My name is Rebecca Rollins, I said, walking closer until I stood at the foot of the stage. I am the managing director of the Snowline Trust, and I am the architect of the Northlight facade. You have made a mistake in your presentation. The room went dead silent. Victor forced a laugh. A mistake? Rebecca, this is hardly the time for technical disagreements. This is not a disagreement, I said. This is a correction. What you are presenting is not Northlight 2.0. It is a derivative of a theft, and I can prove it. A collective gasp. Victor's face went from charming to pale. That is a slanderous and insane accusation. Is it? I walked up the side steps to the stage. You are presenting a theory of light. I am here to present the facts. I pulled the ugly, tape-wrapped USB drive from my pocket. I have my own presentation. Security, Victor hissed. Get her off the stage. What are you afraid of, Victor? I asked, walking calmly to the technician's table. The truth? The technician looked at Victor, then at me, and, smelling the kind of drama that makes a career, he stepped aside. I unplugged Victor's laptop and plugged in my drive. This is highly unprofessional, Victor yelled. So is fraud, I said. The screen flickered. It was not a rendering. It was not a logo. It was a screenshot of an email. From Gregory Rollins to Victor Lowell. Subject, Junior Designer Issue. The text was plain. Victor, she's a non-issue. I've confirmed it. She's in no position to sue. She's my daughter. She'll be quiet. Take the design. We can discuss my silent shares in the holding company when you're back from Gstaad. The air was sucked from the room. I clicked to the next slide. It was the metadata, the original, embedded file information from the county permit filing. File, Northlight Facade Calculations. Author, R. Rollins. Created, October 14th, 2 years prior. Last saved, October 15th, 2 years prior, the day before Victor had presented it as his own. I clicked again. The full email chain. The entire discussion. The trade of my intellectual property for my father's silent shares in the project. The architecture critics in the front row were reading every word, their faces hardening. As this was happening, I saw Ruth. She had moved from the back, not toward the stage, but toward the event organizers, the arbiters of the Alpine Club's reputation. She was not loud. She simply handed a thick, wax-sealed vellum envelope to the stunned club president. "What is this?" he whispered. "That," Ruth's voice rasped, just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "is a notarized affidavit from me, Ruth Calder. It confirms I reviewed Ms. Rollins's original timestamp design files over a year ago. It further confirms her sole authorship of the high-altitude passive light exchange system you see on that screen. It is her work, not his. Victor was trapped. The charm was gone. His face was blotchy and red. He turned on me, his voice a snarl. "This is insane. A fabrication. You were a disgruntled employee. I fired you. I fired you for incompetence. You ungrateful." He was losing it. He pointed at me, his hand shaking. "You're a failed designer. You're squatting in a mud hut in a ghost town. You are nothing. You can't build anything." He had made his final, fatal mistake. He had attacked the work. I said nothing. I turned to the large whiteboard that had been set up for his brainstorming session. I picked up a black dry erase marker. "You are right, Victor," I said, my voice quiet. "I am not a presenter. I am an architect." I put the pen to the board, and I drew. My hand did not shake. The lines were clean, fast, and perfect. The airflow calculation, the Venturi effect equation, the thermal gain formula for R40 concrete at 10,000 feet, the precise geometry of the 7.5-degree louver. It was not a sketch. It was math. It was physics. It was the truth, rendered in structural form. I finished. It had taken, perhaps, 15 seconds. I dropped the marker. It clattered on the tray. I turned back to Victor. His mouth was open. He was staring at the board, his eyes blank. He did not understand a single line. "Now you," I said softly, "explain the math behind your masterpiece. Victor, draw the algorithm." He stared. He could not. He was a seller, not a builder. He only knew how to steal the image. He did not know how to do the work. The silence was broken by a man in the third row. He stood up. He was sharp, elegantly dressed, and his face was grim. "My name is Kensei Tanaka," he said, his voice carrying in the dead silent room. "I am a principal engineer with Arup. I've seen these equations, that formula on the whiteboard." He pointed at my drawing. "That is legitimate. That is a real, innovative, high-altitude passive light solution. That is the real one." The hammer fell. The room, as one, turned against Victor Lowell. I saw a flash of movement in the wings. My father, Gregory Rollins. He was not red. He was the color of old snow, a waxy, translucent white. He had seen the emails. He had heard the word fraud. He understood that his silent shares were now loud, screaming evidence. He was not looking at me. He was looking at Sable, who stood beside him, her face a mask of streaming tears and ruined makeup. She finally understood. Her $1.2 million chalet, her life-changing gift. It was all built on my stolen work. "We are leaving," my father hissed, grabbing her arm. "Now! Through the back!" He tried to pull her away, to get them both out of the room before the media, who were now wide awake, could see them. "Gregory Rollins!" The voice was not mine. It was Hollis. He was standing in the aisle, his thin frame rigid. His voice was a gravel road that cut through every other sound. My father froze, his back to the room. Hollis walked slowly down the aisle. He was not carrying the steel box. He was just Hollis, but he was the mountain. "My name is Hollis Ward," he announced, stopping 10 feet from my father. "I was your father's partner. I am the legal administrator of the Ward and Rollins mineral land agreement." He turned, just slightly, to address the room, to address the investors and the lawyers. "The land Mr. Rollins has been leveraging for his ventures, the Leadville rail yard, parcels 7 through 11, is not his." My father's shoulders slumped. The reversionary clause, triggered by 20 consecutive years of non-industrial use, expired 21 years ago, as of 1 year and 34 days ago. All surface and mineral rights reverted to me. They have since been placed in a public, non-profit entity, the Snowline Trust. Hollis looked at my father's shaking back. "You have not just been committing fraud, Gregory. You have been doing it with collateral you have not owned for over a year." That was the breaking point. "Lawyers!" Victor was screaming. his voice cracking. "I will sue all of you. I will end you." He lunged, not at me, but at the technician's table, trying to rip my USB drive from the port, to erase the image of the email from the screen. He never made it. Noah, who had been filming the entire confrontation, simply and quietly stepped on the power cord, his boot holding it firmly to the floor. When Victor lunged, Noah just put out a hand. "Careful," Noah said, his voice calm. "Electrical hazard." Victor stumbled back. Security was moving in. Reporters were flooding the aisles, shouting questions at me, at Victor, at my father. The panicked MC ran to the podium. We are experiencing technical difficulties. We will be taking a short pause. Please enjoy the refreshments in the lobby." The room erupted into chaos. Victor was shouting about slander. My father was pulling a hysterical, wailing Sable through a side door. I did not move. I just stood on the stage, watching the empire of facades crumble. I looked past the screaming, past the flashing cameras, past the panic. I looked out the massive, floor-to-ceiling glass wall of the Alpine Club. It had begun to snow. It was not the hard, angry blizzard of that Christmas Eve. It was a soft, quiet, steady fall, thousands of perfect, white flakes drifting down, pure and clean. They looked like thousands of blank pages, falling from the sky, waiting for someone new, someone honest, to finally write the truth. The invitation came via a lawyer. It was not a request. It was a summons. My family, what was left of it, was attempting to staunch the bleeding. The Alpine Club presentation had shattered the glass facade of the Rollins-Lowell empire. My father, Gregory, was facing multiple investor lawsuits and a criminal investigation for fraud. Victor Lowell had disappeared entirely. His masterpiece, a public synonym for theft, the Vale Chalet, Sable's Chalet, had been seized by the banks. The Rollins family was, for the first time, not the host of the party, but the scandal at the party. So they organized a damage control Christmas gathering, not in Aspen, which was now hostile territory, but at a neutral, older, quieter lodge near Breckenridge. It was a desperate attempt to shore up the remaining ramparts, to gather the last of their allies and prove they were not broken. I was invited as a formality. I was the loose cannon, the bomb that had already detonated, and they needed me inside the blast radius, where they could, perhaps, manage me. I drove up from Leadville alone. I wore the same wool coat, my boots still dusty with sawdust and concrete. I walked into the lodge, and the music, a sad, piped-in version of a holiday carol, seemed to dip. The room was full of relatives and old family friends, but the atmosphere was not festive. It was a funeral. The air was thick with whispers. With the cloying scent of pine and panic, I saw them all looking at me. I was no longer the invisible, practical daughter. I was the ghost who had come back to claim the house. I saw Sable first. She was not the star. She was not the center of the room. She was standing by a massive picture window, looking out at the snow, her back to everyone. She wore a simple black dress, but her isolation was the loudest thing in the room. As she turned, I saw her face. The mascara was streaked, thick black lines running down her cheeks. It was a perfect echo of my night in the snow. But this time, the ruin was her own. She was a building that had lost its foundation, and she was collapsing in on herself. My father, Gregory, was standing near the fireplace, holding a champagne flute. He looked 10 years older, the skin around his eyes gray and tight. But he was, as always, performing. He tapped his glass. The ting-ting-ting, a desperate plea for order. "Friends, family," he began, his voice straining for that old, confident boom. "Thank you for coming. It has been a difficult year." A few people shuffled, looking at their shoes. I know there have been rumors, misunderstandings, the press. Well, you know how they love to twist things. He was trying to build a new facade, right here, right now, out of pure ego. But the Rollins family is strong, Our foundations are solid, and we will. The main lodge doors burst open. It was not a gust of wind. It was a person. A blast of pure, cold Wyoming air and snow billowed into the warm, panicked room. A man stood in the entryway. He was old, tall, and ramrod straight. He wore a heavy, old-fashioned sheepskin greatcoat, not a modern ski jacket. He was dusting snow from a worn Stetson. The whispers stopped. My father's glass froze halfway to his lips. The man walked into the center of the room. His eyes, the same clear, amber color as Hollis Ward's, swept the crowd. They were the eyes of an apex predator. They were the eyes of the original. "Father?" Gregory whispered. The word was a dry rattle. It was my grandfather, the patriarch, the builder, the man who had disappeared to his Wyoming ranch decades ago, the man who had been silent through my father's entire glittering rise and catastrophic fall. He had returned. He was not empty-handed. He was carrying the green steel box, but it was different. It was wrapped in thick, coarse rope, as if it had just been hoisted from a deep, dark place. He ignored my father. He ignored the stunned guests. His eyes scanned the room, passed over Sable, and then found me, standing in the back, still in my coat. He looked at me, a long, assessing, unreadable gaze. "I am here," he announced, his voice a gravel boom that needed no microphone, "because I am looking for the one who holds the fourth key." He walked to the massive stone hearth and set the box down with a heavy, final thud. "What is this?" my father stammered, finally finding his voice. "This is a private. This is Christmas. You cannot come in here and—" "It was always a private matter, Gregory," my grandfather said, his voice cutting through my father's like a saw. "Until you made it public, until you put the family name on a stolen blueprint." He unwrapped the rope from the box. He undid the clasp. He opened the lid. It was not a map. It was not a hidden ledger. It was a new, thick, leather-bound portfolio, professionally drafted by a law firm in Cheyenne. He placed it on the mantelpiece. "This," he said, "is the Northlight Fellowship." He explained, it was a new charitable spin-off from the original, and still vast. Rollins Family Trust, his trust. It was pre-signed, predated, and funded. It was designed to do the one thing he had always wanted to do: to fund trade apprenticeships and community revitalization projects in the mountain towns his railroad had once served. "The steering committee of this fellowship," he continued, his voice resonating in the tomb-silent room, "will have several open seats, but there are conditions." He looked directly at my father. "The charter specifies that no seat on this board may be held by anyone who, in the judgment of the administrator, prioritized profit over people." He paused. "Or by anyone who laughed in the face of a builder asking for help." A faint gasp came from someone near the front. My father looked as if he had been struck. "The seats," my grandfather continued, "are therefore reserved for the retired miners of Lake County, for the student apprentices of the Snowline Trust, and for the honorary chair." He nodded toward the open doorway. I had not even seen her arrive. Ruth Calder was standing there, her arms folded, her expression one of grim, righteous satisfaction. Architect Ruth Calder. My father was shaking, his face a blotchy, furious red. This is theater. You cannot do this. I am the executor of your estate. I am your son." "You were the executor," my grandfather said, his voice flat, "but you defaulted on your fiduciary duty. You defaulted on the debt you owed the company. You, Gregory, are a liability, not an asset." He turned his back on my father. He turned his full attention to me. He reached deep into the steel box. "Hollis has the first key, to the archives. Ruth has the second, to the land's potential. I have the third, to the ledgers." He pulled his hand out. He was holding a key. It was not iron, not brass, not steel. It was wood. It was carved from a single piece, pale and smooth and strong, birch wood. "This," he said, holding it out to me, "is the side door. The one they forgot to lock. The one they didn't even know existed. He walked toward me, his boots heavy on the floor. He stopped in front of me. "This is an option," he said, his voice softer now. "For me alone. A choice. It grants you, Rebecca Rollins, the right to purchase the controlling interest in the original Rollins industrial properties, the ones Gregory leveraged and lost, for the price of the original, uncollected debt, the debt he owed me, the debt I am now forgiving." He placed the birch key in my hand. It was light and warm. "The purchase price," he said, his voice rising again so the entire room could hear, "is $7,500. The room stopped breathing. $7,500. It was the sum, the exact amount, the payroll I had begged my father for on the night I was locked out in the snow, the money he had laughed at. It was not a number. It was a symbol. It was a bullet, fired in the past, that had just returned and struck its target. But it was not a bullet of vengeance. It was warm. It was an offering. It was validation. It was the full, crushing weight of justice, delivered not with a scream, but with a quiet, perfectly balanced ledger. A sound tore through the silence, a raw, animal wail. It was Sable. She stumbled away from the window, her face a grotesque mask of tears and revelation. She finally understood. Her life, her chalet, her diamonds, her status, all of it had been built on this, on my exclusion, on my father's theft. "Becky," she sobbed, stumbling toward me, her hands outstretched. "Becky, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I'm so sorry." She was collapsing. I looked at her, at this ghost of the star, and I felt quiet. The rage was gone. The cold was gone. "Apologies don't pay salaries. Sable," I said, my voice low, but clear. "But they are a start. They can, perhaps, restore dignity." "This is a circus," my father roared. He lunged forward, his face contorted. "This is theft. This is coercion. This is my company, my house, my legacy." "Your legacy?" My grandfather, who had been standing silent, moved with a speed that belied his age. He reached into the inner pocket of his greatcoat. He produced a single, faded, folded letter. "This," he said, holding it up, "is your legacy." He did not hand it to Gregory. He handed it to me. "Read it." I unfolded the paper. It was my father's handwriting, from decades ago. "Read it aloud, Rebecca. Let him hear his own words." I read, "Father, I am formally notifying you that I am vetoing your sentimental community project. The capital is required for my Aspen venture. This is not a request. The future is in leisure, not labor. I am securing the loan against the Leadville assets. I am confident you will see the wisdom in this." My father's face turned to ash. "His own signature," my grandfather said, his voice like iron. "His own admission. He chose the facade over the foundation, and a foundation of paper. It always burns." Gregory Rollins was broken. He had nothing left to say. He looked at his father, at me, at his weeping daughter, and he turned and walked out of the room. He did not run. He was just gone. The room was a tomb. The guests stared at their feet, at the walls, anywhere but at us. My grandfather turned his full attention back to me. The noise of the world faded. It was just the two of us, the builder and his heir. "This is not a gift, Rebecca," he said, his voice low and intense. "It is a burden. If you accept this key, you accept the fund, you accept the story, you accept the fight that comes with it." He looked me in the eye, builder to builder. I laid the foundation. Hollis protected it. Ruth tested it. He gently closed my fingers around the warm birch key. "But the final structure, that is for you to pour." I stood in the silence of that lodge, the warmth of the birch key seeping into the palm of my hand. It was a strange object, light but strong, a piece of a tree that understood winter. My grandfather watched me, his face carved from the same mountain as Hollis's. He had given me the final piece of the puzzle. He had offered me a way back in, a seat at the head of his new, righteous table. I looked down at the wooden key. Then I looked up at him. "I accept the key," I said, my voice clear and steady in the quiet room. "And I will use the option." I reached into my coat pocket. I did not have a checkbook from my father's bank. I had one from the new Snowline Trust Credit Union. The first check I had written to myself, my first paycheck, drawn from our first paid consulting invoice, was still in my wallet. I took it out, endorsed it, and handed it to my grandfather. $7,500, I said. He took it, a silent, binding contract. "But I do not want the seat," I continued. "The room's remaining occupants, my aunts and uncles, my father's abandoned allies, all looked up, shocked. I am not a Rollins, not in that way. I am not built for their boardrooms. My place is in the workshop." "What will you use the key for, then, Rebecca?" my grandfather asked, his voice quiet. "The Leadville yard is already safe in the trust." The industrial properties my father leveraged were more than just Leadville, I said. I felt the blueprint of his old empire in my head. The option, the side door, it includes the other abandoned railroad depots, the ones in Salida, the ones in Como and Gunnison, the entire network he left to rot, the network you built. I held the birch key up, a small, pale piece of wood against the darkness of the room. "I am using this side door to buy the rest of the line, the rest of the bones." The following week, the ink was dry. The Northlight Fellowship was formally merged with the Snowline Trust. We were no longer just one building. We were a network. I stood before our team in the cold, bright, and now ours archive room. Ruth, Hollis, and Noah were there. "We are now a foundation," I announced, my voice echoing off the old ledgers. "We will use the new depots as satellite campuses. We will launch the Winter Apprenticeship, a network for unemployed tradespeople, for kids who age out of foster care, for anyone who needs to learn how to build. We will teach them how to build warmth from the cold." The meeting was interrupted by a hesitant knock on the steel door. Sable stood in the entryway. She was not the ghost from the lodge, nor the star from the party. She was just a young woman in a parka that was too thin for the high-altitude air. She was pale. Her makeup was gone, and she was visibly shivering, but she was standing. "I heard what you are doing," she said, her voice small. She was speaking to her own feet. I know I don't know how to build. I only know how to be seen, to organize." She looked up, and her eyes, red-rimmed but clear for the first time in her life, met mine. "I need a job. Rebecca, a real one." She took a shaky breath, the air pluming in front of her. "I'm good at paperwork. I'm good at schedules. I can talk to donors. I can coordinate the applications for the fellowship. I'll work for free. I'll get the coffee. I need to learn how to do the work." I did not answer. I looked at Ruth. Ruth Calder, who had seen my own weakness, who had forced me to be forged, just shrugged, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement of her wool-clad shoulders. "The best blueprint," Ruth said, her voice a dry rasp, "is one that brings others into the house, even the ones who tried to keep you out. A structure is only as strong as its ability to welcome." I turned back to Sable. "The position is administrative coordinator. The pay is minimum wage. You will report to Hollis. You start tomorrow." The world outside our mountain continued to realign itself. The consequences of my father's choices were absolute. He was forced by my grandfather to step down from every family board, every charity, every committee. His name, once a pillar of Aspen society, was now a liability. Hollis told me he had seen him once, in town, buying his own groceries. He was not wearing his cashmere overcoat. "He looked cold," Hollis reported, his voice flat. For the first time, he looked like he was feeling the wind. He was finally feeling the chill I had known my whole life. As for Victor Lowell, the The law was less subtle. The state attorney general, spurred by my testimony and the public outcry from the engineering community, issued a subpoena. He was being investigated for felony intellectual property theft and securities fraud related to the silent shares deal. Noah brought me the newspaper with the headline. He thought I would be happy. "That's it, then," he said, slapping the paper. "We won." I looked at the headline, at Victor's panicked, grainy photo. I felt nothing, no triumph, no joy. "We didn't win, Noah," I said, turning back to my drafting table. "We just balanced the ledger." He frowned. "You don't want to celebrate? After what he did?" "He's not the point," I said. "He never was. He's just a failed structure. Justice, real justice, isn't about demolition. It's about building a better, stronger structure that makes the old one obsolete." The work consumed us. As we prepared for the official grand opening of the Leadville campus, the core team found its new rhythm. One evening, Hollis came to me in the archive. He was holding the green steel box. It was light. "It's empty now," he said, setting it on the desk where it had all begun. "The maps are archived. The ledgers are with the lawyers. The letter is with you. My job is done." "What will you do now, Hollis?" I asked. He gave me that dry, rare smile. "This place? It's big. It gets dark. You've got all these kids running around. You need a night watchman, someone to keep the pipes from freezing, someone to keep the box. Even an empty box holds the memory." I smiled. "The post is yours." Later, I found Noah standing in the main hall, staring up at the trusses, his face thoughtful. "What is it?" I asked. "It's not big enough," he said. "Noah, it's 50,000 square feet." "No," he said, pointing to the end of the hall. "The promise isn't big enough." He unrolled a fresh blueprint. "I'm adding 2 more bays to the roofline, expanding the shop." He pointed to the first new section. "This one is for the kids, the high schoolers, a place they can come, no questions asked, and just make things." He pointed to the second. "And this one is for the ones who were never invited, the ones who weren't called, the ones who were told they weren't strong enough or smart enough." He looked at me, his eyes full of a deep, quiet understanding. "This bay is for the ones who were never given a name." The grand opening was nothing like the party in Aspen. The whole town of Leadville was there. The old miners, the new apprentices, the families, the kids. The air smelled of fresh sawn pine, hot cider, and welding ozone. It began to snow, just as it had that day in Aspen, but this was a gentle, quiet snow, a blessing, not a curse. At 7 p.m., as the sun vanished, I threw the main switch, but it wasn't for the electric lights, it was for the work lights, the Northlight system, now augmented with its own internal reflectors, caught the moonlight and the ambient light from the snow, and just as I had designed, it diffused it. A soft, pearlescent glow filled the entire hall, illuminating the workstations. It wasn't a harsh glare, it was a working light, a gentle light. It brushed across the faces of the apprentices, across the hands of the old miners, across the proud, tear-filled eyes of Noah. It was the light of the mountain, brought indoors. My grandfather stood beside me, his tall frame silhouetted against the glow. He watched the crowd. He watched the old-timers teaching the teenagers how to use a lathe. "I was a rich man," he whispered to me, his voice a low rumble. "I built a railroad. I owned mountains. I was truly rich." He turned to me, his amber eyes catching the light. "But you, Rebecca, you are richer. You are rich in people." Before I could speak, Sable stepped up to the small podium we had built. She was shaking. She looked at me, and I gave her a single, steady nod. This was her moment. She did not speak to the investors. She spoke to the town. "My name is Sable Rollins," she began, her voice cracking but not breaking. "And for my whole life, I lived in a house that I did not help build. I was a taker." She looked at the old miners. My family, my father, we took the wealth from this mountain, and we left. This. She gestured to the restored building. We left a shell. I cannot undo what was done, she said, tears now streaming down her face. But I can apologize. I am sorry. I am sorry for what my family did to this town, and I am sorry for what I did to my sister. She looked at me, across the room. I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn my place in this house. She finished. The room was silent. I did not cry. I just nodded. Once, it was forgiveness. It was the feeling of a heavy, uneven stone finally being set flat into a foundation. Its place found, the structure now sound. Later, after the crowd had moved to the woodshop, I walked to the far wall. I took the birch key from my pocket. There, hidden behind a new panel, was a small, simple side door that had once led to a foreman's closet. The key fit. I turned the lock. The room was not a vault. It was not a grand office. It was a small, quiet space, with a single window facing the snow, and on the wall, Noah had hung a simple, carved wooden plaque. It was the sign for my new office. It bore the words I had written on that first, freezing day on the whiteboard. Build quiet, let the results be the noise. I stood there, in the quiet, in the light. The climax was not a shout, it was a hum. From the main hall, I could hear the sounds of the party. It was not the sound of clinking champagne glasses, it was the shh, shh of a hand plane, the sound of laughter, and the high, clear whistle of the wind as it moved through the 7.5-degree louvers on the roof. It was not a howl, it was a song. The city was warming, the story of revenge, the cold, bitter narrative I had carried for so long, had finally, fully dissolved. It had given way to something stronger, something that would last. It had become creation. Thank you for listening to my story. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from. So please share your city or country in the comments below. Let's connect and share our thoughts. Please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button to help this story be heard by more people.